Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about a habitat restoration project that I've been working on for the last 3 years. Now, I'll begin by talking about the Bangham landscape. The Bangham landscape is located in the upper southeast of South Australia, and it's located between Bordertown and Naracoorte, and also sits on the border of South Australia and Victoria, and that's pretty clear by the line of where the vegetation clearance has kind of stopped. Now, the Bangham area is made up of two main vegetation types. We've got South Australian blue gum woodlands, and these tend to occur on flatter, more fertile soils, which are sort of more clay dominated. These blue gum woodlands are interspersed with stringy bark woodlands, and the stringy bark woodlands occur on sand dunes. So these are ancient sand dunes when the sea used to be much further inland. And as the South Australian blue gum woodlands, as you know, has happened across most of South Australia's agricultural landscapes, have been more heavily cleared for agriculture. Now, in the southeast, we think this landscape's pretty special. And some things that are special about it are that the size of the remnants are relatively large. So compared to the Little Desert National Park, which is just over the border, the remnants aren't that big. So they're about 700 hectares in size, and the Little Desert National Park's about 128,000 hectares. Pretty big difference. But compared to our other remnants in the southeast, which 99% of them are 100 hectares or less, 700 hectares is pretty big. They've been cleared relatively recently, so they're in pretty good condition, and they don't suffer a lot of the issues that we have with other remnant vegetation in the southeast. So they don't have lots of weeds, which is good. And the bits of land in between they've been developed for agriculture, but I guess the landscape was cleared relatively recently, so they demonstrate a high restoration potential. A lot of this is grazing land. Some improvements like fertilisers and things and cultivation haven't been fully developed on this land. So within this landscape, we've got about 25% remnant vegetation, and that's pretty good because the rest of the southeast has an average of about 13%. But one of the most special things that we love about this landscape, so the people who work in the southeast and live in the southeast, are the woodland birds that are there. So this landscape is a stronghold for woodland birds in our region. Some of the woodland birds that we find, which some of the Adelaide people might be a bit jealous about, is the black-chinned honeyeater. So this landscape is a stronghold for this species, not only in the region but also in the state. It's a reasonably mobile honeyeater that needs resources of flowering eucalypts all year round. So the South Australian blue gum woodlands are really important for this species to provide the nectar resources it needs. And also in winter, when these blue gums are flowering, we get influxes of other honeyeaters that travel into this area. So we can get thousands of other honeyeater species turn up to take advantage of these nectar resources. On the top right, we have a hooded robin. Now these, as Randall mentioned, have quite complex habitat requirements. So they like quite an open understory, but they need, fallen timber and litter and that sort of thing. They also require habitat patches at about 200 hectares in size, which is pretty big for such a small bird, and they require fairly good connectivity between remnants. Similarly, the brown tree creeper down here has requirements for good connectivity. Studies have found that they're reluctant to cross gaps of 200 metres or more, so between trees. So they do need good connectivity between remnants. And we also have the diamond firetail. Now the Bangham area is the last stronghold for this species in our region. So the diamond firetail used to be widespread throughout the southeast, and their range has contracted so much that this is now sort of the only area we tend to find them on a regular occurrence in the southeast. So what all these species have in common is that they're strongly associated with these blue gum woodlands. There's anecdotal evidence that that these species are still declining in this landscape, and we think the main reason, so we've got high remnancy, 25%, but we've only got about 5% of the South Australian blue gum woodlands remaining. So we think that's sort of the main issue for these species. We have had, declines in other species. So the barking owl used to be reasonably common in the southeast. There's now only a few known pairs. Grey-crowned babblers, which aren't very common in South Australia at all, were last recorded in this landscape in 1983, so in the Bangham Conservation Park. And the bushstone curlew was last recorded 10 years later in 1993 in one of the privately owned bushland. Now, these species are also associated with blue gum woodlands. So we know that there's a problem in this landscape. And so what are we going to do to fix it? So here comes introducing the Landscape Links project, which is what I'm working on. So we want to establish wide and biodiverse corridors. So we think that by reconnecting areas of habitat, that's going to help the species such as the brown tree creepers that need continuous habitat to get from A to B. The corridors need to be about 100 metres wide so that they provide habitat for the species and sort of trying to discourage things like noisy miners from taking over. We want to link patches, so your typical corridors of linking patches together, but also buffering larger remnants of vegetation so that we can improve their resilience. We need to involve private landholders. This landscape doesn't have any other public land that we can restore, so we need to involve private landholders. And the other goal of the project is to restore the South Australian blue gum woodlands. So as with pretty much every conservation project, we've got a limited budget. And that means that we need to prioritise where our restoration efforts go. So the Science Monitoring Knowledge branch of DUNA assisted me to develop a series of metrics so that we could prioritise the landscape. We looked at patch value of the existing remnants, so we put things into it such as bird species richness. We also weighted this towards our target bird species, so some of the species that I had up there before. We looked at patch size and condition, and we also weighted it towards South Australian blue gum woodlands. Into the metrics, we combined a connectivity, so this was a neighbourhood analysis looking at the distances between patches so that patches closer together would be prioritised. And we also factored in scattered tree densities so that we could look at the value of the cleared agricultural landscape. So something that had scattered trees would be prioritised over a bare paddock with nothing in it. And then the cost and physical metrics were sort of looking at identifying areas that would be the most suitable or the most feasible for restoration. So we looked at the land use in the landscape, so whether it was cropping or pasture or scattered trees, and also valuation data to prioritise areas where we thought we had the most chance of getting hold of the land, and we could exclude areas that were completely off limits. And then we also built in a metric on physical characteristics so that we could single out those areas that were suitable for replanting the blue gum woodland. So that we looked at the topography, so flatter sort of areas, and also the heavier soil types, so the clay soil types. And what we get is this beautiful rainbow. So you can see that the grey patches are the remnant vegetation, and the black bits are the South Australian blue gum woodlands. So all these metrics have been combined and spat out in an ArcGIS model so that we've got a hotspot map of where our priorities are. So we've got the red areas as being the highest priority areas, and unsurprisingly they're connecting generally between areas of the blue gum woodlands, and they're also around the soil types that are suitable for replanting these woodlands. It fades down to orange and yellow and then goes down to greens and blues for lower priority. So this just shows where we think the highest priorities areas are, and there's sort of an obvious link that we could see that is following from the Little Desert area going across to the west, and that's sort of a part of the landscape we thought we should focus on. So that's all great, and how does this translate into on-ground works? So this actually shows where we've restored. We've got some sites identified that we've managed to get hold of with the landholders. So we've got this one here is a typical patch-to-patch type corridor, and this landholder was really keen to be involved. These two, which we're really lucky to get hold of, focus on our priority South Australia blue gum woodland habitats. And this one over here bridges the largest gap between the conservation parks and one of the large heritage agreements in the area. So to implement this project, We had to work with private landholders and NGOs. We used targeted engagement. I approached the landholders with these maps, and I think by having something that they could see, we had clear goals and maps of priorities, they were more likely to be involved. They could see what the vision was. We were able to offer an offset incentive payment, and obviously that's pretty important in getting hold of the land. We have management agreements that go on the property title, and that's to protect the revegetation in the long term. Here's some pictures of people helping us plant. So, you know, any revegetation project, you can't do it alone, and we rely on volunteers to help put a lot of the plants in. And that's been a lot of fun and also a great way to engage the local community. So far we've planted about 112 hectares of corridor and 30,000 seedlings. And I guess in the scheme of what's needed, it's not that much, but I think it's a start. And this project has identified the importance of this landscape in our region, and we hope that by raising the profile of this area that it will encourage future investment. And there already has been the purchase of a property in this area by Nature Glenelg Trust, who are going to restore the entire 500 hectares. So that's a really exciting positive flow-on effect. And we've established a woodland bird monitoring program, and that's so that we can track the effect of the revegetation over time to see if it's worked. And I guess I just wanted to leave you with this picture today. In the last week since I prepared this talk, bush stone curlew was sighted on one of the sites adjacent to my restoration site. Now, I personally can't take credit for that, but I'd like to see it as a positive omen that we're going in the right direction. And I guess a real measure of success for a project like this would be hearing these guys, the wailing call of these guys echoing through the night in this landscape again. Thank you.